From Bloomberg Quick Take, I'm Madison Mills. Today we're talking about breaking news developing around TikTok. I'm joined here by Bloomberg's own Kurt to talk about what's happening with Microsoft, TikTok, and all things ByteDance. Kurt, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us. I want to jump right into it. What is happening?
Yeah, so it's been a pretty busy day. It started with the report. Bloomberg had a report that it sounds like President Trump and the US government may require TikTok to be sold off. It's owned right now by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And if you followed the news over the last couple of months, you've probably heard President Trump and other politicians say publicly that they're worried about security of TikTok and the data that the company collects because it's owned by a Chinese company that the US is obviously kind of feuding with right now. And so the first part of this story was the president may come out and say, hey, ByteDance, you have to sell off this US version of TikTok. Now, the second part of that story, which came a little bit later, was that Microsoft is one of the companies who is in talks now to then buy that part of TikTok if it is indeed spun out of ByteDance. So first part is that it may have to be sold. Second part is that a potential buyer that has emerged already, and that is Microsoft.
And why Microsoft as opposed to any other social media network? Why not Facebook?
Yeah, well, I'm told that it's not necessarily that others couldn't potentially get involved or couldn't potentially bid. It's just that Microsoft is the company that's kind of already in the midst of this discussion and this process. But you may remember just 2 days ago, Bloomberg was all over a hearing in Washington, D.C. with Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook. They were answering questions about antitrust. And there's a lot of concern that those four companies are too big, they're too powerful. Facebook would be a very logical home for a service like TikTok, of course, right? But they already own Instagram and they already own Messenger and WhatsApp. And so the thought of bringing a service like TikTok into one of those other four companies may just be too much when it comes to regulation and antitrust. Microsoft was not at that hearing. And so because they don't already own a lot of consumer products in the same kind of vein, there's maybe some thoughts that Microsoft would be more likely to get a deal done than some of these other, logical buyers.
And why were US officials concerned about TikTok in the first place? Are those concerns valid?
We don't actually know for sure whether the concerns are valid. The concerns are privacy and data related. So obviously the United States and China are kind of in a constant battle around technology, around power. And we've seen some of the Chinese tech companies basically be blocked but in the US. Huawei comes to mind for those who are unfamiliar, right? And so the US government, starting late last year, started to look at TikTok because it is owned by a Chinese tech giant and say, is this a threat to US security? There's a ton of US citizens who use the app. Is the data that TikTok is collecting, is that being used by the Chinese government in a way that would pose a threat to the United States? And so that review has now been underway since late last year. And so that is the main impetus for why the president or any regulators might recommend spinning TikTok out so it's no longer, again, wouldn't be owned by a Chinese tech company.
And I want to dig into how this is going to impact TikTok users. I am very active on TikTok. A lot of our audience is. Will folks be able to continue using the app in the US? And will they continue to have a global audience if this deal goes through?
Yeah, well, because it's also new, we don't know all the details, but I'm pretty confident that you'll continue to be able to use TikTok for now. There's certainly nothing that I'm aware of that's going to change in the next 24 hours or 48 hours. But you may recall hearing that the president has threatened to ban TikTok in the US. Now, I don't know if that would actually happen. I don't know the logistics of how that would actually happen. But the idea that TikTok may be owned by a US tech company, a US based tech company, would probably ensure that people could continue to use TikTok, indefinitely, right? So I don't anticipate that any of the features are going to be removed anytime soon. But the idea of it being owned by, for example, Microsoft, probably means that there's a higher likelihood it will continue to be available in the US than otherwise.
And just taking a step back for folks who've just joined our live here, can you talk us through your process in finding out this news and anything else new you've found out since pushing your first breaking news piece?
Sure. So we've been following this story from a high level now since late last year. I mentioned that the review of this TikTok, it was actually an app called Musically that was bought by ByteDance a few years ago. That acquisition has been under review now for months, and so we've been aware of the fact that this was possible. We saw even this week, the president and some of his advisors start to say, hey, we're really looking seriously at TikTok as a security threat. And then this morning, we started to hear some rumblings that things might come to a head, that we might hear the end of that kind of investigation. And so I think, as I mentioned, the first story earlier this morning was that we expect that the president will come out and kind of issue some kind of statement at some point today that TikTok should be sold off from ByteDance. And so that was the first step. And then obviously these things are, as you start pulling on certain threads, I feel like sometimes more information just falls out of the tree a little bit. As that started to happen, then we started to hear, well, actually, there has been ongoing conversations with Microsoft about a potential sale. And so that's kind of been the progression so far today of this story. But again, it was something we've been, looking at a high level now for a long time.
How could something like this impact the TikTok influencers that some of us are familiar with, the Charli D'Amelio's of the world, right? What happens if parts of TikTok get sold off and dismantled in this way?
Yeah, I mean, we don't, the long, short answer is that we don't know. The longer answer is that depending on who owns TikTok, it could be regulated in different ways, right? And so, for example, if it's owned by Microsoft, if it's owned by a US-based company, perhaps there will be different rules around influencer marketing, around things like tips in app. We've seen this with Instagram, or we've seen this with Twitch or other kind of live streaming services. Like, how can people make money from these platforms? I really don't think that it's going to have a huge impact again on anything immediate for users or for influencers. I think the real risk would be if the president, instead of coming out and saying, hey, ByteDance, you need to sell off TikTok, if he comes out and says, hey, we're going to ban TikTok, well, suddenly that's obviously a different scenario. But again, I'm not even sure if he would really be able to do that at this point. But for now, I think influencers, I think regular users are going to be able to continue using the app pretty much how they've been using it up until this point.
And Kurt, one more time, can you just recap this developing news for us?
Sure. I know it has been a crazy week, so it's only fitting we'd end Friday on a crazy day. The timeline here is that earlier this morning, Bloomberg had a story that we expect the president to come out and basically demand that ByteDance, which is a Chinese tech company that owns TikTok, that the president would demand that they sell off TikTok in the US and perhaps other countries. As we were reporting that out, we started to hear more information, specifically that Microsoft is in discussion with TikTok about potentially buying the company from ByteDance. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. We're still awaiting kind of a formal announcement from the president, which we think could happen as early as today. It could also happen a little later. And then obviously the companies themselves are not confirming any kind of deal talks right now. But we wrote about it at Bloomberg. We feel pretty confident with our sources on that these talks are indeed happening.
One user watching is asking about how much this could cost Microsoft. Do we know?
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, we haven't heard numbers, but I think it is going to be massive, would be my guess. And I think it could be even much larger if there is any type of bidding situation, because the Facebooks, Amazons, Apples, Googles of the world, who we were talking about earlier, probably it would be a tough place for any of them to get a deal like this through regulation, given they're already so big. But those companies aren't going to want to just sit back and let Microsoft get TikTok without any type of competition. So I think if there is any type of window here where there might be an open bidding process, the price could be up very high. I mean, I'm a little scared to even venture a guess because, again, I do not know numbers. But you look at something like WhatsApp, which Facebook bought a few years ago for $19 billion. I think TikTok is seen much more in the vein of Instagram, where there's a much more obvious business model around it. It's obviously popular with teenagers, which is a huge important demographic that a lot of tech and media companies want to be involved in. So I would imagine that this would be a tens of billions, if not $100 billion acquisition.
And one final question for you, Kurt. I know you have to go continue covering this breaking news, so we thank you for making the time. What would this mean for competitors like Byte app, for example? Would it be good for them, bad for them? How will it impact the space?
Yeah, well, when the news first came out earlier that the president was thinking of announcing that TikTok needed to be sold off, we actually saw Snap stock rise and go up. I think people saw this as a positive for a competitor like Snap if TikTok is suddenly kind of floating out there without a real owner. Now, of course, with Microsoft potentially being right there in the wings or another buyer, I think this is still a danger to a Snap or a Byte, anyone who competes, because suddenly these tech companies have very deep pockets, right? And they're not going to simply buy TikTok and let it squander. If they own it, they're going to invest deeply in it. So I think that the real risk here for TikTok is regulation. But I think if it's able to get a deal done and it's able to land somewhere with some deep pockets like a Microsoft, I think that there's a real chance that this is an app and service we're still talking about 5-10 years down the road.
And a final question for you, Kurt. Is there any chance of us losing access to TikTok entirely in the US?
Well, there's a chance in the sense that the president kind of wants that to happen. So I wouldn't say it's impossible, but again, I don't really know the logistical process of which that would happen. Now, if a deal gets done and TikTok is acquired, especially by a US-based technology or media company, I think that access to TikTok will continue to be available to people. I do not expect that TikTok will be unavailable anytime in the near future. But the only reason I'm not going to say that would never happen is, again, because we have a president and some members of Congress who are very scared of the app and its connection to China right now. So this would, in theory, this potential deal with Microsoft would, in theory, alleviate some of those concerns so that TikTok would be available moving forward.
Kurt, thank you so much for making the time for us. To our audience, thank you for watching. And please follow Bloomberg Quick Take on all your social platforms, wherever you get your news. Thanks so much.
Thank you.